It was past midnight, and the silence in the house was thick. Rose lay in bed, eyes open, the weight of sleep stubbornly refusing to descend. The sheets felt too heavy, the ceiling too still. She turned again for the 5th time in 10 minutes, exhaling sharply and pulling her robe tighter around her. Something about the silence unnerved her. It wasn't just stillness. It was the kind that hummed beneath the surface. Like something was wrong, but the house hadn't gotten around to telling her yet. She shut her eyes and tried again. Then, a sound. Faint. A thud. Something between a muffled fall and a sharp scrape. She sat up, blinking. Her heart stuttered for a second. She waited, listening. Nothing. Probably nothing, she whispered to herself. She wasn't about to go wandering around a mansion in the middle of the night for no reason. She pulled the sheets back over herself. Then came the second sound. Clear this time. A heavier bump. Then silence again. And that was what made it worse. She threw the covers off and slipped her feet into the first slides by the bed. The hallway greeted her with a draft. Somewhere in the corridor, a decorative plant cast long shadows on the marble floor. She tightened the robe sash and moved slowly, padding through the corridor with cautious steps. The light was on. From that room, the study, Rose paused at the corner, where the hallway split. The study's door was half shut, light spilling out in a narrow triangle across the hallway. She had never been inside. Jae-ho had made it clear early on that some places in the house were his zones, and the study was one of them. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Her fingers barely touched the door when a low, strangled sound met her ears. It wasn't anger. It wasn't speech. It was pain. She pushed the door gently, and froze. Jae-ho was hunched over behind his desk, one hand gripping the armrest of his leather chair while the other clutched his stomach, knuckles white. His face was drenched in sweat, sharp with strain. A bottle of painkillers lay open on the desk, some scattered. Jae-ho. He didn't lift his head. Jae-ho. She stepped in fully now, her voice cutting sharper. What's wrong with you? Still no answer, but he blinked, clearly struggling to remain upright. Without thinking, she grabbed his phone from the desk and moved closer. Who's your doctor? Give me his number. Right now. No, don't. His voice was rough, frayed with resistance, but she ignored it. You are not dying under this roof because of pride. Her voice was clipped, already scrolling through his contacts until she spotted one saved simply as Dr. Minsik. She dialed. The man on the other end answered quickly, groggy, but alert the moment she explained what was happening. He's been pushing without proper sleep? The doctor asked with clear disbelief. I warned him, he's running on caffeine and willpower. His stomach lining is already inflamed. Minutes later, the doorbell rang, and the doctor was ushered in by one of the night staff. Jae-ho sat slumped on the couch by now, too tired to protest. The doctor checked his pulse, his temperature, made him lie back while examining his abdomen with gentle but firm hands. You're lucky it's not an ulcer yet, he muttered, pulling out a small kit from his bag. But keep this up, and you'll earn yourself a hospital bed in less than 2 weeks. Rose stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The doctor turned to her once he administered an injection and handed over the pills. He needs proper meals, full rest, and someone who won't listen to him when he says, I'm fine. That includes at least 6 hours of sleep daily. His body is waving a white flag. He won't listen, Rose said flatly. The doctor smiled faintly. Then maybe he'll listen to you. You're smarter than you let on. Rose didn't react outwardly, but her eyes met the doctor's. Calm. Sharp. I suspected something was wrong for a while. He gets this subtle tremor in his fingers when he hasn't slept well. I've seen it. The doctor gave a small nod of admiration. Most people wouldn't notice. He hides it well. Not from me, she said. Jae-ho shifted then, his voice faint. Are you both seriously talking over me like I'm not here? Yes, they both said at the same time. It almost felt like comedy if the air wasn't still so thick. The doctor packed up. I'll come by again tomorrow. Make sure he takes those meds tonight. And rest, no negotiations. As he left, Rose closed the door behind him and returned to the couch. Jae-ho looked tired, not just from pain, but from the weight of being himself. "You didn't have to stay," he murmured, eyes fluttering shut. The medication was already working. She didn't respond immediately. She just walked over, helped him to his feet with quiet determination, and led him gently out of the study, his arms slung across her shoulder. His resistance was minimal, like a man who was too used to being strong alone and wasn't quite sure how to surrender. They made it to his bedroom. The door shut behind them. That night would mark the first time Rose would ever enter the room he had kept closed. "Sit," she said softly. He obeyed, dropping onto the edge of the bed. She helped him lie down, adjusting the pillows behind his back, then pulled the thick duvet over his chest. He didn't speak. His breathing was heavier now, the medication beginning to work through him. She stood up, brushing invisible lint off her robe, already turning toward the door. But before she could take a step, his hand reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Don't go." The words were soft, slurred slightly, but unmistakable. She turned, surprised by the grip. His fingers weren't tight, but they held her like she was the only steady thing left in a spinning world. "Jae-ho." His eyes barely opened. "Just stay for a while. Please." There was something about the way he said it, almost like a child whispering from a nightmare. Not a command, not a performance, but a request. Quiet, honest, raw. Rose's lips parted slightly, unsure how to respond. No teasing words came. No sarcasm. She slowly nodded. "All right." The room was quiet, too quiet. Jae-ho had already drifted to sleep after taking his medication, his breathing even but shallow, as though he was afraid of taking up too much space even in rest. Rose sat on the edge of a small armchair by the wall, legs tucked underneath her, eyes on the ceiling. She hadn't turned the lights off completely, just dimmed them enough to let the soft shadows dance gently across the walls. Her gaze kept drifting to the bed. Minutes passed, then hours. Sleep refused her. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the faint sound of him shifting in bed. Maybe it was how large the room felt and how small she did within it. Or maybe it was the way his hand had clutched hers just before sleep took him. He hadn't wanted her to go. And for some reason, she hadn't wanted to leave either. She shifted, resting her head lightly against the back of the chair. Still, her eyes remained wide open. Jae-ho stirred. A soft sound, barely louder than breath, escaped him as he turned in his sheets. Then suddenly, like instinct, like habit, like something deep and unconscious, his arms stretched out, searching. It found her. She stiffened at first when his fingers wrapped weakly around her wrist, then slowly, she let them stay there. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't say anything. But there was something in his hold, so vulnerable, so childlike, that her chest tightened. So much for a cold-hearted heir. She rose gently, peeling her legs from beneath her, and crossed to the bed. Not beside him. She wasn't ready for that, but close enough to rest on the far side, above the covers. She sat with her back against the headboard, arms folded across her chest. She watched him for a while. The way his brows twitched in sleep. The light sheen of sweat across his forehead. The strong but tired lines of his jaw. She thought of how he had collapsed earlier in the study, of the doctor's warning, of the way no one else in the house even knew what had happened. All this alone? Even power had limits. Her eyes grew heavier. She fought the pull at first. But as the minutes stretched into hours and the night thickened, she slowly drifted off. Her head tilted slightly. Her breathing slowed. At some point, maybe in his half-sleep state, Jae-ho turned toward her. Not fully, but enough that his arm rested near her hip. He didn't wake. He just stayed like that, like a man reaching for something he didn't want to lose. It was the first time Rose saw him look like that, unguarded, unarmored, undone. She finally fell asleep. The light that filtered into the room was gentle and gray. Morning but not loud. Rose's eyes blinked open slowly. Disoriented. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then she felt it. The soft pull of sheets around her legs, the warm air of the room, and the sound of steady breathing beside her. She turned her head slightly. Jae-ho was still asleep. His face looked more peaceful in the early light, younger even. The tension that always seemed etched into his expression was gone. She looked down at his hand, still close to her. Carefully, she slipped away. No sound. No sudden movements. She adjusted the sheets around him, tucked in a corner he'd kicked off, and rose from the bed like she'd never been there. Her feet barely made a sound on the floor as she walked toward the door. She paused, one hand on the handle. A glance over her shoulder. Just once. And then she slipped out, her thoughts a swirling mess of things she hadn't planned to feel. It had been 2 weeks since the night Rose stayed in his room. 2 whole weeks. Since then, everything felt different. Quietly, steadily different. She didn't know what to make of it. At first, it was the small things, Jae-ho appearing more often in common areas of the house, like the library, the lounge, or the inner courtyard where she sometimes took calls or read magazines. She'd catch him there, pretending to be busy with something on his tablet, his eyes occasionally lifting toward her. Not saying much, but not ignoring her either. Then came the dining room. Rose had grown used to taking her meals alone, occasionally with a soft-spoken chef or maid checking in to see if she needed anything. Jae-ho had always been elusive during mealtimes, preferring his meals in the solitude of his private quarters. But one morning, she entered the grand dining room to find him already seated. It startled her. Not just his presence, but the way he sat there so casually, scrolling through something on his phone, a half-full cup of tea beside his plate. No assistants. No staff hovering. She blinked. "You're here." "I live here," he said simply, not looking up. But he stayed. And then it became a pattern. Breakfasts weren't necessarily shared, but they happened in the same room now. Dinners too. Sometimes he arrived after her. Sometimes he was already there. Sometimes she left first. Sometimes he did. But the air had changed. He poured his own tea now. He passed her the salt without being asked. He greeted her, sometimes even smiled. Not the stiff, camera-ready smile she'd seen at events, but something more genuine. Something that felt like a quiet thaw. At first, Rose thought it was politeness. But then came the shift in public. There was a gala, a charity event hosted by his father's company. They arrived together, arms linked, cameras flashing. The usual charade. But something about him felt warmer. He leaned in closer when she whispered something. Laughed softly at her jokes, even if no one else could hear them. When a photographer asked for a picture, he didn't just hold her hand. He pulled her gently closer and placed a kiss on her temple. It sent murmurs through the crowd. Rose stiffened slightly, caught off guard. She smiled anyway, her eyes catching the lenses aimed at them. But when they turned slightly away from the lights, she whispered, "You're getting really good at this." His eyes didn't leave hers. "Maybe I'm just not acting." Her throat tightened. She didn't reply. It was easier when they were strangers. Rose told herself that often, sometimes in the mirror, sometimes while staring blankly at her untouched food during dinner, and most especially when she caught Jae-ho watching her across the room with an expression too soft for a man who claimed he didn't want the marriage either. When they first moved in together, the rules were silent but clear. No intrusion, no pretending unless the cameras were on, no unnecessary interactions. They had abided by those unspoken rules for weeks. She had her world. He had his. Their marriage was a legal knot, not a sentimental bond. That's what made it easy. But ever since that night in his room, the one where she'd stayed until morning, something had cracked. And Jae-ho wasn't pretending it hadn't. She noticed it first with his presence. He was everywhere now. At breakfast. At dinner. In the hallways, when she stepped out of her room. In the living room during her casual evening TV sessions. He'd never interrupt directly, but he was always near, always watching, always available. The man who once treated silence like a second skin now started conversations. "How was your meeting with the stylist today?" He'd ask over grilled fish and jasmine rice. Rose would blink. It was fine. He'd nod, Wait, then offer something more. I think you'll look beautiful in that encore dress you mentioned the other day. She'd force a smile, distracted, her fingers dancing nervously over her spoon. Thanks. And then fall silent. It happened every day. He would talk about the weather, her fashion work, news articles, even shows she liked. He started noticing the small things, mentioning that she liked her tea hot, or how she always left one bite on her plate when she was full. It unnerved her, because this wasn't the agreement, and the more he tried, the more her walls came up. In public, she was still the picture-perfect wife. Bright smiles, affectionate touches, the occasional joke whispered into his ear that made them look like best friends. She played that role so well that people envied them. But behind closed doors, she reverted. Short answers. Emotionless goodnights. Doors closed with gentle finality. One evening, after an exhausting event, they came home in the same car. Jae-ho looked like he wanted to say something. He kept glancing at her, his jaw working as though holding back words. Are you tired? He finally asked. A bit, she murmured. A beat of silence. Rose, do you only talk to me when people are watching? Her eyes flicked to him. The sadness in his voice startled her. She didn't answer right away. He exhaled quietly. I mean, you smile so warmly in front of them. You hold my hand like you mean it. But then, when we're home, you act like I'm a stranger. She looked out the window. Isn't that what we are? He flinched. She saw it, even if he turned his face away. I thought we were trying to keep it simple, she added, voice tighter now. The less emotions involved, the better. His hand curled slightly against his thigh. So, you prefer if I kept acting cold? I don't mind your other side. The car stopped. Neither of them moved. Eventually, Rose stepped out first and walked into the house without turning back. Her heels echoed against the marble floor. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, not because she felt guilty, but because she didn't know what he wanted from her anymore. Later that night, she heard a knock at her door. Not loud, just two soft taps. Rose? Jae-ho's voice, hesitant. There's something I wanted to give you.
She didn't respond.
He waited for a moment longer. Then she heard the soft sound of something being placed on the floor, followed by retreating footsteps. She waited, counted to 20, then opened the door. It was a single white envelope. Inside, a photo. It was from that night at the gala, her laughing, him gazing at her like she was the only thing in the room. A perfect shot. A beautiful eye. There was a sticky note on the back, and it was written, I wasn't acting that night. By Jae-ho. She stared at the words for a long time, then quietly closed the door, and sat on the floor, clutching the photo with trembling hands. The photo stayed under her pillow. Rose hadn't thrown it away. She hadn't returned it either. It simply lived with her now, like a quiet reminder of something she didn't want to address. But Jae-ho had noticed. She hadn't looked him in the eyes since the night he left the envelope. And that made everything more unbearable. He used to handle silence well. Now it gnawed at him.
She was still polite.
Still graceful and composed. She answered when spoken to. She wore her smiles like art in public and shared easy laughter that left others charmed. But none of it belonged to him. Never to him. One rainy evening, when thunder rolled quietly across the sky and their shared home smelled of chamomile and distant smoke, Jae-ho found himself walking to her room again. This time he didn't knock. He waited until breakfast the next day. Rose had just taken a seat at the dining table when he pulled out the chair across from her and sat. His eyes were tired, but his posture was firm. You never returned the photo, he said quietly. She stilled, mid-pour of her pineapple juice. I didn't know if I was supposed to, she replied. He nodded once. A thick pause lingered between them. Then he leaned forward. Rose, do you hate me? Her head snapped up. His voice wasn't accusing. It wasn't cold either. It was soft, strained, like the question had sat heavy on his chest for too long. Her lips parted, confused. What? Do you hate me? He repeated. No, she said, almost too quickly. I don't. I just... She hesitated, then sighed, setting her glass down. We were both forced into this, Jae-ho. You know that. I have no reason to hate you, but that doesn't mean I suddenly love you either. His face didn't change much, but something in his eyes flickered, as though he'd just been told again that this wasn't a story with a happy ending. I know, he murmured. I know we didn't choose this. He looked down at the table, tracing an invisible line with his thumb. But I guess somewhere along the line, I started wanting more. Rose felt a strange twist in her chest. I wanted to hear you laugh for me. Not for the guests. Not for the camera. Just me. His voice dipped lower. I wanted to hear about the things you love, what makes you angry, what kind of cities you dream of seeing, what you think when you're silent for so long. She swallowed hard. I wanted to take you on a vacation, he added. Not for social media. Not for the image. Just because you love it. And because you haven't gone on one since we got married. Her hands curled under the table. He took a breath and looked at her. You make everyone else feel like they know you. But I live with you, and I don't even know what your favorite color is. She looked away. I thought maybe if I tried, he paused. If I gave you space, if I came to meals and talked like a normal person, you'd open up. Just a little. But it's like I'm still invisible unless we're outside, in front of people. He tried to smile, but it broke before it reached his eyes. And what hurts the most, Rose, is that in a few months, all of this ends. The contract. The marriage. And you'll be free to leave. I will leave, she said quietly, her voice calm, not cruel, just firm. The second the contract ends, I'll go. It hit him like a slap he hadn't braced for. He nodded slowly. Right. But it's not because of you, she added after a beat. It's because that was always the plan. That didn't make it hurt less. She didn't know when he started liking her, and maybe he didn't either, but he did. And now he was stuck, liking a woman who had no intention of liking him back. A woman who gave the world every version of herself, but reserved nothing for him. Jae-ho stood, hands clenched. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me, he said softly. I just wanted to know you before you disappear from my life. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked out of the dining room, shoulders heavy, footsteps slow. Rose didn't touch her juice again. She sat in silence, her heart pounding with thoughts she didn't want to name.